we're perhaps not in a second wave in Melbourne, we're perhaps in a second outbreak of the first wave. And I think that what's happening in the Northern Hemisphere as it gets colder is probably a good indication that this thing is going to follow a similar pattern and travel around the world a couple of times, like the Spanish flu and the influenzas before that. So, you know, there's still that risk that no matter what we do, we could find ourselves in a lockdown again at some point next year.
Today on Dirty Linen, I'm talking to Paul Kasteel. He's got Haa Bar in Chapel Street. We've chatted during the pandemic about various restaurant-related matters and life-related matters, but we've never actually, you know, hung out or met, or I don't even really know where this conversation's going to go, but I know it's going to be interesting. And let me start by saying hello and welcome, Paul. Thank you for coming along and having a chat to Dirty Linen.
Yeah, hey Dani, how you going? It's nice to actually finally connect with your voice. I feel like we've had so many conversations in a virtual world and sent each other messages, so it is really nice to hear your voice. And I think it's great what you do and what you've been doing as well, particularly the support for and the lobbying for the visas and the visa holders in this country.
Thank you. Well, I know that that's an issue that you're also passionate about. And if I think about some of the conversations we've had, they've been really quite diverse. They've been about, you know, how to apply for grants and some of the frustrations around that process. More recently, it's been thinking about outdoor dining and all the various conundra around that. I think the fact that you're on Chapel Street in Windsor, I mean, Chapel Street it was an interesting strip pre-pandemic with, you know, a lot of, I guess, ups and downs and ins and outs, but it's such an important street to Melbourne. We've also talked about your son who has autism and challenges around that. I remember one time we were trying to work out what the actual regulations were around moving a house and viewing rental properties. So if I think back to that, it's almost a little bit of a through line through this crazy pandemic and all the crazy ways that it's impacted us in all areas of our lives.
Oh, for sure. You know, anyone that's at home with young kids, homeschooling and trying to work would have some insight into what that's like. And, you know, autism adds another complexity. And yes, my mum was evicted from her house 2 days before we went into stage 4 lockdown because the people that owned her house sold it. So they just went through the process of going to VCAT to get a possession notice and a possession order. So, and then we're on Chapel Street. We've been here for 15 years. Outdoor dining is really complicated for me because I'm actually upstairs. So, you know, there's a whole lot of criteria I don't meet to even be able to get a permit. So we're trying to work through those issues with some of the team in the Stonington COVID response team.
And council's fun to deal with at the best of times, but you know, I think I've heard some good council stories, you know, through this, but I've also heard a lot of frustration, and I've envisaged the tearing out of a lot of hair.
I think councils are just by definition their own worst enemies, and when you throw in the complexity of dealing with Yarra trams and Vic roads around outdoor dining on the street, you know, it's just incredibly difficult for them to step outside the bureaucracy and the red tape and to fast track things with so many regulations that we kind of have to meet and satisfy. So it's all well and good for Dan Andrews and for, I guess, the mayors like Sally Capp to get up and make those big announcements. But when it sort of gets thrown down to the people that have to implement it and operationalise it, I think reality and vision are sometimes worlds apart. And perhaps there's a lesson there in terms of validating an idea before you kind of create false hope for our Premier and Lord Mayor, because I've heard from friends that there's just as many complex issues in the city of Melbourne for some people. And I think Wes Lambert from RCA, our CEO, coined the phrase lucky lease. I think lucky lease was used when lobbying the state government around outdoor dining, and some people are lucky and some people are probably a bit more disadvantaged by it because, their competition will get more seating on the street. And I think when people come out of lockdown, that's where they'll want to be on a nice day.
Yeah, I'll just clarify that RCA is the Restaurant and Catering Association for anyone who doesn't know. So it's it's a lobby group that is working behind the scenes to assist the restaurant industry. Not every restaurant is a member, and I mean, yeah, it's we'll get Wes on the show one day to have a chat, but I think it's one of the issues that's been, I guess, brought to light, or that people have thought a lot about during this, has been representation, and about how the restaurants have tried to organise in various ways, but by the nature of the industry, it is so many small businesses who naturally are not all going to think the same thing, and of course are in very different circumstances, and their access to outdoor dining is just one way in which they can be lucky or unlucky.
I just think that speaking for hospitality, I think the majority of us just want to sort of feel that it won't really work or solve the problem, and that we need to find a way to open up and to be able to have customers back inside our venues. My opinion on that is that just as an observer of human behaviour, which is pretty fundamental to being a hospitality operator, if you do the right thing, we're an industry that's already got food safety. We've got plans. We were the first to put a proposal to the federal government for reopening. It's a really easy step for us to, have more sanitisation and hygiene practices. And for me, the idea that I can control my customer flow, I can have set booking times, I can take temperature checks at the front door, we can sanitise, we can introduce simple things like pedestal fans and open windows to create airflow, evaporative cooling systems which move outside air through venues are quite cheap compared to air conditioning. Sure, I'm not I'm not a health expert, I won't even try to pronounce that word, but and I agree that there's more risk, but it's a different type of risk. When we opened for that sort of 5-week period after the first lockdown, I just saw how well we can control it and, sanitise between groups. And, late night when people had had a few drinks and they were coming up the stairs, we had a few issues at the entrance. But what I see is that when you go down to the bay on a nice sunny day, and you see people everywhere, the problem is that it's fundamentally our nature to want to connect and be close to people. And you introduce a few drinks and, people loosen up and the barriers get dropped. You drop off your kids at school, parents haven't seen each other for a long time, people are craving social time. So, our principals had to send out warnings to all the parents about congregating outside the school and not social distancing. And so, when you look at putting outdoor dining in the street, sure, it might be safer to be outside, but I sort of really question how you manage the traffic around doorways and restaurants and entrances, and if people know that if people see their friends, they're going to lean over the fence. And I've spoken to people in Geelong who have already opened up, and they're telling me that the social distancing, it's really disappearing down there after a few drinks on Friday night, and people are congregating and spilling out on the streets. And so I really think that looking at New York, where they forecast 60% of restaurants to close. And to put that in perspective, I think I read last week they had 5,000 cases within a few days, and they're going into winter and probably their second wave. I just think in Melbourne, Dan Andrews is not listening. Everyone's screaming at him and saying, including the federal government, I think Frydenberg today, to say, we've got to find a way to open. And we've got to find a way to let business and the economy function, because it's sort of at such a devastating point for mental health, for businesses, and businesses are going to be closing. So, just the outdoor dining thing, idea not validated, idea not well consulted with in terms of industry stakeholders, and you bring it into a local council level. I mean, Vic Roads is saying we have to put water barriers in the car parking bays, and by the time you do that, you get 2 seats. You've got to deal with the issue of weather protection from an awning that doesn't extend out. I think your last publication, I read they were predicting 50% of days would be rain days and 50% wouldn't be rain days, if I read that right and remembered it correctly. And then you've got the curb. So do you box up a step? It's just really complicated, and I think a lot of us don't think it's going to work. And then not every hairdressing salon or clothing shop wants to have cafe seats out the front of their venue either.
Sure.
Just to sort of look at it from a different lens.
You've really spoken about so many things just then, and I would really, I'd love.
So to bring it back, and to bring it back in, the message is we've got to open, and we've got to be able to have customers inside our venues in a safe way, and coexist with something that I think is going to be around for a few years.
Yes. Well, I'll just talk about the Bureau of Meteorology thing first of all, just to cover that off. So I wrote an article that was in The Age, Good Food, this week, and one of the experts I spoke to was a Bureau of Meteorology, and I gave them some parameters to work out exactly how many days they could predict that would be conducive to outdoor dining in Melbourne. The parameters I gave them were that it was not too windy, so we agreed on that there were wind gusts of no more than 40 kilometres per hour, that the maximum temperature was between 15 and 35, and that there wasn't more than, I think, 1 centimetre of rain was what we decided. And there was just a shade under 50% of the daylight saving months. A shade under 50% of those days would be conducive to outdoor dining. So, I mean, we all know Melbourne, like you might get a good hour and then a bad hour and then a good hour again. But, I mean, that doesn't really help restaurants take bookings. It doesn't really give customers confidence. You don't want to be like waiting for the thunderstorm, rushing out, grabbing your outdoor table and then coming home again. So, I mean, as soon as Melbourne, you put the words Melbourne and outdoor dining together, everybody knows that it's going to have its challenges. I mean, I'm looking out my window now and it is so windy. It's a great day for drying washing, but not a great day for eating some food on the street.
I have visions of golf ball size hailstones and flooded underpasses in the city that happen about once a year in December.
Yeah, there's always some big rains in December. Well, yes, unless there's a drought. But anyway, yes, and to that, I guess just like kicking the can down the road and saying, we've got this great idea, you guys work it out, let's cut the red tape. I think one thing that's sometimes sort of glossed over is that, red tape is always, put in these quote marks as though it's always a bad thing. I mean, a lot of that red tape is to keep us safe. And, of course, we don't want somebody getting run over by a tram. We don't want a chair toppling off the curb into the gutter. So, I mean, the red tape is it's not just there because people love tape. It's it might be, the rules might get too complicated over time, or there might be overlapping jurisdictions that make things all just unworkable. But you can't just have a free for all. I think any business owner can understand that as you've just said, there's a lot of rules that restaurants already abide by that are there to keep customers safe and to allow businesses to run smoothly.
Oh, totally. But I think where the red tape becomes a barrier is when, Vic Roads is sort of constrained by 2 options. And I spoke to a urban landscape architect who I introduced to Stonington, who got involved and donated his time and didn't want any money and just wanted to help the council do something great down here. And there are other options that, are probably far more aesthetically pleasing and provide the same level of safety. But it sort of seems quite difficult because they're not vetted and approved. by the organisations that we have to deal with locally. So, but 100% agree. It's got to be safe. I mean, we have rules for a reason. I come from an industry that's highly regulated. And a high risk industry as well, with alcohol after 1 o'clock and DJs and stuff that we probably won't see again, I don't know, until July next year if we're lucky.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess, you're not a health expert. I'm not a health expert. I think we probably, even as non-experts, we can probably agree that the safest.
Oh, I did work in life sciences for a while, and I did run a couple of medical clinics in a past life. So I've got a lot of friends that are doctors. So I got a little bit of knowledge there.
Okay, well, we've all probably.
But I'm not an expert. You're right.
Well,
yeah.
I guess the safest level of virus in the community is 0, and that doesn't seem like it's going to happen. Not by Sunday, and for the announcement that we're all hanging on. But given that 0 doesn't seem just around the corner, I think everyone is wondering what is the safe level to open up, at least to some degree, whether that's indoors, whether that's outdoors. My inclination is to defer to the official health advice. But one thing I've also been watching in horror this week has been restaurants in many places in Europe being closed again. And I think that's the thing that I'm just so terrified of for us. I feel like we're so close to things being...
Asia as well now. Malaysia's just gone back down into lockdown.
I hadn't even caught up with that. So I've been looking at Barcelona's closed down.
So it's happening in Southeast Asia.
Czech Republic's closed down. Northern Ireland's closed down. There's really, unworkable restrictions in, the north of England. Paris is restricted. Lots of other cities in France. It's pretty bad.
And that's the thing that scares me, and I'd probably call myself quite a pragmatic person and a realist. And the one thing I think is that history teaches us is that we're perhaps not in a second wave in Melbourne, we're perhaps in a second outbreak of the first wave. And I think that what's happening in the Northern Hemisphere as it gets colder is probably a good indication that this thing is going to follow a similar pattern and travel around the world a couple of times, like the Spanish flu and the influenzas before that. So, and we're not truly a locked down country, because we still have ships and planes coming in every day. We have flight crews disembarking and going to hotels and that aren't in quarantine and being served by people that live here in Melbourne. So there's still that risk that no matter what we do, we could find ourselves in a lockdown again at some point next year.
Well, that just seems like an insupportable and devastating notion. I mean, how can you get your head around that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I did this business grant program with the local council, and it was basically an application for $5,000, and it was called a rapid grant. And perhaps it's not so rapid because I think it's been going for 10 weeks and they're only just starting to dish out the money. And they had some good intentions. They did a business diagnostic, and I sort of went into that expecting them to go through what I'd applied for in terms of support. I think I asked for a freezer and a new vac pack machine and some money for marketing for our pivot towards doing, more takeaway and home delivery stuff. And every dollar is just worth 10 these days. It's just a battle. So, and I was kind of taken aback a little bit, and I've given my feedback to the council, so this is no news to them, that I got taken down a rabbit hole and told to forget about my 4 walls and my lease, and I need to reinvent my business and come up with some virtual unicorn to make money and survive. And I thought about that afterwards, and look, I've got some previous history and skill sets that perhaps some other people in small business don't, and I'm quite resilient when it comes to planning, and I sort of thought, wow, this could just be really disruptive and really, for a lot of people going through this. So my feedback was perhaps they should kind of be pragmatic and focus on what people ask the money for and offer the visionary brainstorming session as an option. And I found it useful because I like having my thought process stimulated. But to sort of bring it back to what do I do, I actually haven't figured that out yet, Dani, and it's quite scary. I've got a first floor business that doesn't make money unless it's got 200 people standing around drinking, DJs, people buying food. We're in an industry that has really compressed margins. So unless you're at the top of the game and you have a really successful product or you're part of a group where you've been able to achieve some cost efficiencies, the hospitality industry was, for a lot of people, was already hitting a wall where margins of less than 5%. So if you don't have the people in the venue and the turnover, you will go broke very, very quickly. And that's the harsh reality. So I sat in on I attended a insolvency seminar yesterday because the federal government, and that's a reality, liquidation, insolvency. It's not one that I was looking at before we closed down, but it's definitely one I'm looking at now. And I'm carrying creditors and debts, and the business owes me money. I have a mortgage like most people, 2 young kids, so a lot of financial pressure. But I had a viable business, and so I went to an insolvency seminar yesterday, a virtual one, to learn about what the changes were that the Treasurer announced, and the loosening up to make it easier for small businesses. And I didn't really know anything about it. And I sort of left feeling quite stressed out at the end of it because, the definition of insolvency is that the business can't pay the debts that are due when they're due. And I think by that definition, a lot of businesses, as soon as they don't have cash flow or revenue, are insolvent. Now, right now, we're protected until the 31st of December. But on the 1st of January, a lot of us are going to open with a bunch of creditors who have debt. Now, the simple idea of voluntary administration is that you restructure your business and put a plan together. This is what I learnt yesterday, so it might be right or wrong. And you approach your creditors and you need 50% of them to approve it to allow you to continue running the business and to trade out of what you think is an insolvent position. And you need to feel that you can do that. Now, why I felt so stressed out is because there's no clear certainty or roadmap in Victoria for what we can do. And I think I stitched together a little 1-minute video from Dan Andrews' conference last Sunday. I think I summarised an hour and 40 minutes of him talking to about 1 minute. And between Sutton and Andrews, there is no certainty, a lot of confusion, contradiction. He said to quote Dan Andrews, "I can't give a week's notice because we need the data." And then in another breath, he said, "We won't just rely on the numbers, we'll look at the story behind the numbers." And at the end of the day, how do I restructure my business and put a plan in place if I actually don't know how many people I can physically have inside upon which to base a revenue forecast? I can't forecast my sales for next week, let alone January, February, March. I can make a whole lot of assumptions. So in terms of the idea of putting a proposal out there into my creditor, the world of my creditors, the people like my fruit supplier, my meat supplier, my alcohol supplier, I can't actually honestly put my hand on my heart and say this is when I'm going to be open and how much money I think I'm going to make and when I can pay off my debts. Impossible. So what do? I have to perhaps, I can't I don't have the size of business or the resources available to me that I have a team of people I can direct to do things that some of the bigger groups with deeper pockets have. I'm just a small business. So I have to do what I can with my time as a business operator with two young kids, one with autism, and that's a huge burden on our time. And there's only so many hours in the day for re-educating yourself, learning new skills, applying for grants, following up grants, applying for local grants, dealing with outdoor dining issues, and how do you get around the fact that you're on the first floor. And I'm still trying to figure out what my product might look like. And it has to be something that solves a problem for people, because I think people that are at home want to feel normal. So I think if you can figure out, something to give people that takes a little bit of the stress of the situation of being stuck at home away, that's a starting point. And I think for our industry in hospitality, it has to be something that potentially lets you connect with your customers, and something that you can bring back into your venue as well. So, a lot of people that are doing the boxes and the picnics, I love what Jason McLaren-Jones did with the chairs and the tables out on the domain. I thought that was brilliant. There's a lot of people doing really clever stuff that makes it an experience for people, and I think that's the key. And for me, for Miss Cuckoo, which is our food part of our business, and Hoo Haa, I haven't figured that out yet, and that's quite scary.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's as you're speaking, I can sort of feel like the crush of ways that you could turn. Like you could think about outdoor dining. You could think about this. You could do a seminar. You could recut a video of the premiere. You could, you can look after your kids. You can, you can sit around. You can worry. You can worry about your staff. There's so many places that you could put your energy.
Oh, it's overwhelming.
I can hear the overwhelm. And I think, going back to where you started, just with this just previously, talking about the Premier and the Chief Health Officer and looking for that certainty. I just think life and business particularly is just not compatible with a pandemic. And, people are looking for certainty all around the world, and it's really hard for a leader to give it, because you just actually don't know where it's going to pop up next. You just don't know if, like you say, like if a flight attendant's going to get off a plane and pass something on to the guy that brought the luggage up, or whatever it is. I just think it's there's just really difficult decisions being made at every level of society, and none of them are being made in a climate of certainty.
Look, I respect leadership, and I think Dan Andrews is a strong leader, and I think he's got conviction, and I certainly respect people that believe in themselves. But equally, and I think he is quite decisive. But equally, I think the reality of it is that it has been mismanaged, and that's clear and evident. And 9 people saying that they don't know who made the decision. I think the fact that they didn't do a deal with Salesforce when they could have, and that putting in a contact tracing technology that was offered to them months ago and still being months away from being able to test that is one of the things that scares him, and that's a big assumption on my part. Like, don't quote me on that. That's just an opinion put together on hearsay. But I think where it's falling down is that the polls and the people have shifted their view. And I think from my perspective, there's not enough engagement or consultation or listening going on. And I get it. They're flying by the seat of their pants. And I think someone said to me, you wouldn't take the pilot out of the pilot's seat when the plane's flying through a storm. And I said, you would if he was headed straight for a mountain and not listening to the fact that he was headed for a mountain. So, I think that the reality is he's the state leader, and I think unfortunately for Victoria, he's not listening, and there's not enough engagement. And hey, I'm just one small business, so I I try and deal with it by just focusing on having a plan and trying to work with what I know. And, you wake up and go, what are the 3 or 4 things I'm going to work on today? And it's still stressful because it's such a moving target. But I think, a lot of the time, it's like goal setting. You get overwhelmed by big ideas, and it's just sort of focusing on, okay, what's my goal? How am I going to get through this? And then breaking it down into little steps and just trying to focus on that. And I think one of the other things that a lot of us probably suffer is trying to avoid getting pulled down the rabbit hole on Facebook and social media.
Yes. That's hard. I mean, like if I think about today, I just feel like I've got nothing done. Like apart from talking to you, which is good, and I'm talking to you, I'm only talking to you, and that is actually such a nice thing to do, because it's pure and it's clear and it's solid time, and I'm not being pulled in any other directions apart from by my dog who's looking at me telling me it's time for a walk. But yeah, it's so distracting and tiring, and I think we're all at such a low ebb that it's almost like you keep trying to fill up on stuff, whether that's information or, for me it might be another piece of chocolate or another cup of tea or another glass of wine.
But the information is overloading if you're an owner. I mean, we've had so many announcements. You've got the apprenticeship scheme, okay, and I just wrapped my head around that this week for a day and a half, and I found out that there's only 100,000 places. There's no state caps; it's a national cap, and that most of those places will be taken up within 2 weeks. And people in Victoria in hospitality will be disadvantaged because they're not in a position to employ anyone because they're closed. And the the job maker program, well, no one that's on JobKeeper is going to do job maker until April. And if you're not, and I spoke to someone last week who said, Paul, we opened just before the first lockdown, and we've managed to sort of keep going and employ some staff, and job makers just popped up. Do I fire my full-time person who's doing 40 hours a week and employ 2 people on 20 hours a week each because the government will give me a $400 wage subsidy?
Yeah, I've heard of people being let go for that. So it's, again, I suppose it's an idea that it's kind of sounds good, but then the way that it can be applied or the way that it rolls out is not great.
But it's every week. It just sort of feels that, like, whether it's a grant or apprenticeships or a seminar, it's just there's all this other stuff. We're not actually open, but I'm busier than I've ever been and feel like I'm not actually getting anything done in the business. Just like you, I kind of come to work and do all this stuff and go home and go, God, I didn't get anything done at work today.
And you probably lost money as well.
I'm losing money every week. Don't worry about that. If I close, I'm losing $1,000 a week, and if I stay open at the moment, I'm losing $2,000 a week because of the few staff I've still hanging on to that are on visas.
Paul, that is so tough. It's so tough. And, it's so hard. And I totally get why when you're in that position, it is, for so many businesses, it's on a knife edge. And I can see why, well, obviously people just want to open. I mean, apart from that they need to have money coming through the business, it's what they do, and it's how you slowly try to start to feel normal again and give your staff that sense of, if it's not normal, like at least it's perhaps on the pathway to normal. It's just, you just must be making so many hard decisions every single day.
Oh, I think it's just people just that work in hospitality. They do it because they like social contact. So, I don't really want to do takeaway food or home delivery. I want to have people, in here that we can give hospitality to and look after and get to know and have those conversations, and then hopefully they come back and become a regular. And I think unfortunately, we're at a point where it's gone on for so long now that, for me, it's just the idea of holding my team, which is my family, together. It's just getting harder, So I think we just offered one of our boys who's been on the bench, but he gets job seeker, and he was a casual who's worked for us for quite a while. Really nice guy, and we offered him an apprenticeship to train him up as a supervisor, and that would have been an additional expense for the business that we can't afford, but we sort of thought it was worth rolling the dice. And in the space of 2 days, we got to the point of signing him up and enrolling him, and he just pulled out at the last minute. And he pulled out because he said, look, you can't give me more than 14 hours a week at the moment, and with the uncertainty of COVID-19, as much as hospitality was going to be my career, I'm going to go find a job in an industry that's I'm not going to lose it in, because I need the money and the certainty.
Oh, that's really heartbreaking.
So, yeah. So, because part of it for me, it's about supporting them and giving them some money to live on, but it's also about holding the team together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really hard. All right. Well, Paul, let's both go about our days of getting nothing done. But before we say goodbye, is there anything else that you would like to say?
Yeah, it's time to unlock. It's time to unlock. #unlock. That's all I can say. I think Melburnians, as a majority, want businesses to open. Let's do it in a safe way. We can do it in a safe way. I think people are running out of money, but if you can support local, support local.
Oh, I really wish you, your business, your family, all the best. And yeah, I look forward to continuing the conversation with you in a venue, outside a venue, but somewhere with a drink in my hand sometime soon. But thank you so much, Paul, and yeah, stay strong.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dani.
Okay, great to chat. This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about. We spend a week thrashing around each issue, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
This is a Deep in the Weeds production.